You guys can't see video right now. Um, this is, I found myself not being able to sleep tonight. For once in my life, I actually find myself on the edge. And I don't think a lot of people understand or have a clue as to the severity of the situation that we're in. You see, the way how things go, if Donald Trump is allowed to conduct the business of the people as head of state, and by some means there is civil unrest or there is a breakdown of democracy, this doesn't affect just the United States of America. It will globally affect the world. And why that's a problem is because China is in a position to be the seat of power. And Vladimir Putin, while not as economically viable Russia is than other territories, and while Russia is not in a position as unique as China is to exploit the economies of the world, Russia is in a very interesting position where if they can prove that the democratic experiment through sedition, deception, undermining this democratic experiment, if he can, through that and disinformation, destroy this system, they can go back to being a communist society. We know in his country, it is run in an autocratic way. They say they have elections, but he almost poisoned his rival and so on and so on. That is not the political environment that we want the world to turn to. An environment like China, an environment like Russia. We are happy when people have a certain degree of freedom to do whatever they choose to do. In China, people are regulated as to how much they can do and what they can do, how many children they can have, and so forth and so forth. So, you people out there haven't realized how close to the end we are of democracy. You don't have a fucking clue, which is why I'm up tonight. And nobody is going to talk me down on how serious the situation is. No one. So, I will continue. The freedoms that you experience right now are freedoms that very quickly, in an instant, can all come to an end. And the world as you see it right now can end very, very rapidly. And what's amazing about this is the so-called shadow government, the so-called New World Order, that you stupid fools do not realize can be around the corner, can easily turn by the change in philosophy of how the world is run. And that is what you fools do not see being threatened right at this point in time. You have no sense of looking several steps down the road. You are blinded. I think of Star Wars and how the Republic became an empire. It was through lack of caution. It was through people being very lackadaisical about what is transpiring. And no one seems to realize that this thing is easily on the verge of destruction. That is why I am so vehement every time I come on here. And any fool who wants to tell me otherwise will get me exceedingly angry, because you do not understand the severity of the situation. I have been speaking about this now, and this will be my third day. I haven't chosen to speak about boxing or anything. It is very perturbing what happened, and the consequences are extremely far-reaching. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a riot. These people broke through the walls of the seat of democracy in Washington, D.C. I don't give a fuck if they thought D.C. should be taken down and cleaned out. I really couldn't give a flying fuck. You got to understand right now how angry I am. And I'm pretty sure a lot of military are exceedingly flaming about this incident. It's nothing to do with race, class, or creed. It has to do with an experiment, a system. See, Ronald Reagan was able to work with Mikhail Gorbachev back in the 80s and successfully was able to transition the then United Soviet Republic into a democratic republic in which certain states seceded from it. In convincing them to do so, America, very interestingly, was able to persuade them into the democratic model. I'm giving you a history lesson because a lot of you are naive, foolish, stupid. And I intend to use these words for a specific reason, because the outcome is very easily moving the needle in another direction. And none of you seem to see it, because you cannot see that there are strategic people in strategic positions to bring about strategic outcomes. You do not understand what I am saying. You think you understand what I'm saying. So I am very perturbed with what I'm seeing, because what made that incident so horrific is the absence of the safeguards. It is not that these people broke through into the seat of Congress and the Senate. That in itself is horrific. No matter that only 4 lives were lost. The horrific part about the whole thing is the infrastructure that was supposed to be in place wasn't there, and it wasn't as a result of people not trying to put the measures in place, but that people associated with Donald Trump did not put the measures in place. They removed the measures, showing the level of control that he wields right now in his seat of power. And he is actually playing a game, and he has an end game in store. And he is determined to take the seat of power by any means necessary. And no one seems to understand that he is backed by many people. I will continue. So, Ronald Reagan was able to negotiate with Mikhail Gorbachev, showing him that the democratic model can work. United Soviet Socialist Republic, and it is a republic, by the way, was skewed in that direction. As a result, countries like Yugoslavia, Ukraine, Latvia, these all seceded from the USSR. And they became their own states, they became their own nations. The USSR at that time had economic problems themselves. Now, mind you, in World War II, it was the USSR under the leader Stalin was able to quell the German forces that were advancing in an attempt to take over Europe. Why am I talking about all this? Because there is a relevance to everything I'm saying. Fast forward to the year 2010, and the United Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR, no longer being, however, was being reassembled because the great democratic experiment seemed not to be working in favor of Russia. Coca-Cola and all these companies went into Russia, and capitalism seemed to be exploiting big business in Russia, but still it didn't trickle down to the common person in Russia. And so, Vladimir Putin began his trek back towards socialism. There were elections. There's a certain degree of democracy there, but it is more of a face. Now, there is something else you need to understand about that republic. And it's somewhat similar to Iran. Russia once had czars. Czars are like kings. They functioned well under a king with his different domains and municipalities. Stalin sort of experimented with Lenin's model. And so while Russia was once upon a time, to a certain degree, they were somewhat, quasi-democratic, if you want to call it that. They moved and used different experiments. One of them is socialism, communism. Now, communism in and of itself is not a bad thing. Let me be honest with you. It has very good principles, but when communism is coupled with nepotism, fraud, and exploitation of people, suddenly it's a very deadly thing. Now we hear about socialism. My country is a democratic republic which uses socialism. Canada uses socialism. But what is socialism? It's a form of communism, yes, in which the state provides or makes sure and ensures that every person can get certain universal things. Sometimes this socialism, as in Russia, they provide the needs of all the citizens, their work, their jobs, whatever, but they take away, in socialism, their ability to choose and navigate other things. They work on perfection as a citizen, and citizenship is seen as something that doesn't so much develop the individual as it does develop the society. The individual is sacrificed to the society. Now, in a democratic society, even the United States of America, there are certain things which are socialist things, such as social welfare. Everyone has a social security number, and social security numbers identify you. That is a socialist idea. So there is socialism in terms of Everyone should get an education and go to school. Therefore, we have public schools. That's a socialist idea. Now, having said that, it is not for everything. It is a capitalist society. So, why did the experiment fail for the USSR, whereas it succeeded for America? Well, it didn't quite fail for the USSR. Capitalism is still a wonderful thing. In the USSR, they make their own movies, they make their own films. And of course, marketing these films and movies to the world is a form of capitalism. So, the problem I believe that the USSR had in trade negotiations was there were these big companies like Coca-Cola, which is worldwide, and other companies, which to this day, they're all inside of the United Soviet Socialism, Russia, Russia there. But the problem with it is you can't have a one-way street in capitalism. So those companies were doing very well in Russia. Their give back wasn't that great. And what did Russia have to offer the world? What did Russia have that can compete with these companies? You see, if not kept in check, capitalism can be a very deadly thing. Because capitalism doesn't deal with the individual either. It deals with businesses. So, capitalism and socialism need to check each other. Enter into the equation the United States Congress and Senate, the Republican and the Democrat. Democrats are pro-socialists. They care about universal this and universal that for everyone. The Republicans are capitalists. They believe in business and prosperity of businesses. The American experiment was brilliantly done and built off the backs of the military complex, no doubt about it. But nonetheless, the experiment worked because, brilliantly spoken, they understood that socialism was necessary to help each individual express themselves fully, but yet at the same time, capitalism was important to be able to market the individual and have prosperity over that. As such, they were able to combine those two things. Now, since America thrives off of inventions and creativity, they have a system in place for that. The Soviet Republic of Russia didn't have those systems in place. As much as they had systems in place for education and for inventions and experiments and all of that, the downside to it was they didn't know how to market and the business models necessary to get these things in operation. They were behind the curve in that regard. Now they are, and most of the world, they've caught up. So what did Russia do? Feeling like they had been cheated, feeling like they had been exploited, Russia decided to now pitch their experiment. The communist experiment, the socialist experiment. To do this, they needed to have their propaganda program, just like how the United States had their propaganda program that worked to convince Russia to follow their model. So, what we have been seeing, it started off with WikiLeaks, and then we saw the Associated Press covering certain things, and then we started following other things. And then, of course, there was, forgot what his name is, the guy that was in the CIA, Snowden, and he sort of broke mold on some other things. And we found out that in the background, All countries monitor their people. And now today we know this for a fact. The device I have in my hand is being monitored. So what do you do? In a world where there's a big brother watching over you or potentially doing so, what do you do? Post 9/11 was one of the most mafioso times ever. And it's still that way, but I tend to be insensitive to it. With the Patriot Act. And that changed the game forever. But what does this have to do with Russia? What does this have to do with China? What does this have to do with our present state? Well, okay. So, 2010, Putin's been elected. He's been in power for a very long time. They've had elections. They voted him back. And in the meantime, we've had some wars that happened in different places through the 90s, etc. In these, post USSR territories that have now become their own territories. And they're solving problems. They're dealing with ethnic cleansing. They're dealing with all kinds of issues. But then Russia starts now moving towards trying to get resources from different states. And so we hear of the big issue where they're moving in on Ukraine and trying to get certain resources from Ukraine. Russia's a very, very big nation. They're trying to fit themselves back together and become the United Soviets, Socialist Republic of Russia, in other words. Putin's leading the way. Just like in the United States of America, where this lead with Trump is a lead to try and get back to the way things were, Russia decided to regress backwards and try to go back to the way things were, which means not being truly ethical, not going in the pure sense of what communism is and what socialism is. No, they're playing it from, I want to sort of consolidate as much power as possible, and I'll be the Ayatollah, I'll be the Tsar, and you guys will be my subjects. So they try to return to that model because they believe that's better contained and much easier to control. Now, with that understanding, I go into this segment. Disinformation campaign. It's always been around, but usually, now that the United States was the singular world power, this disinformation campaign began because of conspiracy theories that started to begin somewhere around the time of Snowden, where somewhere around there. And people began to wake up to the fact that they were naive in the 80s and in the 90s, and knowledge started increasing. The internet started to be a place where people could access information, verified or otherwise. And people started to realize with the information age that things weren't what they thought they were. I think 1999, The Matrix sort of opened people's eyes who never really read books like that. It did open my eyes. Now, the point behind it is, with people finding out new information and new knowledge, if you say you're doing research, but you don't really have verified sources, but yet you find out new information, you must verify that information. And this is where the problem started to begin. Popularized opinions don't necessarily mean that they are correct. Preying on people's fears was something that happened in 9/11. It happened post 9/11. And different governing programs and regimes changed the way how people looked and viewed at things. You're wondering why I'm giving all this big background study, because everything I'm saying is relevant to today. So, people were skeptical about things, started questioning things. The average Joe began, as they say, got woke and started to look into many different things. I myself, during that period of time, I was just a young guy at the time, and I was beginning to see, everything isn't just by route. It's not just you go and do this and you do that and you follow this, and everything works out if you do the right things at the right time. And life don't really work like that. Now, during this time, the USSR is trying to return to what they know, their culture, their roots. They identify with themselves. They start doing things for themselves. While that is happening, in the United States of America, Bill Clinton ends up being president of the United States. Now, why this is relevant is because you guys remember the Slavic War in Yugoslavia, and then America was in there flying their planes over and monitoring that situation. And that had relevance again to the countries which were in the Eastern European bloc, because we now call them Eastern European countries, right? Now, what's important about this is how Yugoslavia's situation was handled is from a perspective of capitalism. And capitalism can be equally as evil as communism. And here's the weird thing about it. Even with a mix of socialism and capitalism, depending on how you mix it, and if there is dishonesty in that whole process, if people are using capitalism or socialism for personal gain and benefit, if they're selfish, like some of these guys without conscience in Washington, D.C., and they're just using it to manipulate it for personal gain, it is equally as evil as socialism, communism, or any other ism. The premise of all of these isms, whether it's communism, socialism, or democracy, is based on moral, ethical beings of the character of the people who are put into power to serve. They are put into power to serve. It's different to, I'm a king and I inherited power and you serve me. Okay? It is a different model to that. All the totalitarian governments, it goes one-way street. Okay? Now, monarchies can also work and be viable if the leader understands his responsibility to the people and treat them with love and care. Then a monarch can also be a symbol of great things. And we have it in the UK. We have a queen who is the head of the United Kingdom. So monarchies can work. It's not that these different models I just mentioned can or cannot work and may be appropriate for different countries for different reasons. It is that through greed, nepotism, deception, lies, the leaders that are supposed to be operating in a particular capacity in these countries, when they exploit their position of power, these things become evil. Now, so that you will understand what I'm saying and why this is important, is because the experimental model that we're looking at now is the democracy. The figurehead and leader of the free world at this time, because the United States is seen as the superpower in the world at the present moment, is Donald Trump. Inside of Congress, we have senators and we have congressmen who again represent the figureheads or representations of the people in different states. Now that you understand the situation, I need you to get it clearly. When Donald Trump abused his power, he went against the principles and morals and ethics of his position. Ultimately, he used his position for personal gain. There's something called politics. And in politics, one must know how to survive. But there are certain boundaries to which a politician should not go beyond. And the whole point of being a politician, many-tician, a practitioner or technician for many, the whole point behind it is to serve those who you represent in the capacity that is specific to what your post or position is to represent them. That's the whole point behind a politician. Now, we have seen a corruption of this honorable position by several senators and congressmen. They have desecrated the representation of the people in terms of code of honor. If the people you represent are crooks and criminals, you should, as someone who not only represents them, but you are a figurehead of them, instruct them otherwise how to conduct themselves so that they do not harm each other as well as harm the other members of the Union. The United Soviet Socialist Republic was bound together under a separate set of rules to the United States of America. Do understand both were united. So I want you to understand now what is going on. Back in Reagan's time, Reagan offered the experimental model towards Gorbachev of a democratic model. While some of the infrastructure was in place in the USSR to transition into this model, a lot of it was lacking. Because this model, in order to be successful based on the United States model and not the United Soviet Socialist Republics model, involved understanding markets and commerce, individual business development, and generally capitalism, which it was a new concept to the Russian people, of which America was way ahead. And so I began to exploit the situation, and it was more one-sided. What is happening today is an attempt for the Soviet Socialist Republic to be able to present to the Western world their model of governance. This is what Donald Trump is the figurehead of, which is why he does not and he hesitates to speak anything ill of Vladimir Putin. So, with that understanding, which took me a very long time to explain, but it was very important, you must understand, therefore, that that fits right in with Donald Trump's personality and the way how he conducts himself. Because if he is a czar, if he is a king, at least on the Western side of things, and Putin is a czar or king, now they can conduct affairs, and the people, being their servants, will follow in and follow along. And governance becomes easier, and then they can exploit the system, use as much resources as they want, fill themselves with what they need to do, because they have conquered what they have to conquer. This is the understanding behind it. Now, having said that, they want to introduce this new system to the world. China has benefited economically from this system by using the people and human resource they have in their country and exporting that resource throughout the world. They have done very well because, one, they copied patents and of different things and were able to take the human resource, develop them to a certain point where they owed the state this, that, the other, and ensured that they paid them back through labor. So they educated them and made sure they put them to work to do the specific tasks, requirements, which were specific to what they needed to do. Control the population when the population was out of control, and then had them go to different countries, expand outward with their businesses, run other underground businesses, and so influence and expand the world. Right now, technologically, they're way ahead of the curve. And now, businesses and other things are marketed to them. Now, somebody who grows up in a communist society doesn't see it as anything bad, even though that society may shield them from other influences outside of themselves. In the Western world, what we generally tend to do is we will shield someone from communism by making it a taboo word. So we don't have like blocks and shields on that. You can go read up on communism and all that stuff, and you can go in libraries and read about it. And you're free to express yourself on it, but there's a taboo behind it. So how the Western world deals with things is by taboo, but of course you can still be free to free your mind and go read up on anything. That freedom that we all have is precious. That freedom is not something that every um, society and system has. And the checks and balances put in for that freedom to be so, and for the economies and for the individual peoples to be able to do what they do and still sort of thrive somewhat or have a reasonably good standard of living, it came about because there were checks and balances along the way. In this case, the checks and balances are being violated because there's a certain degree of morals and ethics that follow these checks and balances. So, if there is no moral or ethic behind the leader, he will look for loopholes in the checks and balances, and he will exploit those loopholes as much as is humanly possible. This is the case with Donald Trump, but that's just him by nature. And that makes him, because he identifies with totalitarians and czars and kings and those kind of guys, because he identifies with rulers and leaders who are very autocratic, he identifies with Putin, and he's very open about it. He identifies with Putin, and he identifies with the leader of North Korea. He has not been able to stop the leader of North Korea's advancement in nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un is still working on his stuff. And he has not been able to get Vladimir Putin to lose an inch of ground. Now, here's the other story behind this story. Barack Obama. When, the Soviet Socialist Republic China also has a social republic as well, the Republic of China. But the United Soviet Socialist Republic once existed, and some of the territories were once under its rule. So Vladimir Putin tried to get back some of those territories through war and violence, constantly going and waging war at the peripheries of their domain. This is where the humanity crisis began to begin, and this is where NATO, as well as the United Nations, put sanctions on Russia and started to intensify the sanctions. And this is where Barack Obama and the United States of America were putting enough sanctions on Vladimir Putin to want to push him out of office and lose power. Donald Trump is the absolute pushback on that, where the warfare now is where the Soviet Russians are pushing back on that, and they are looking to destroy as much as possible the democracy of the United States of America. Now you say to yourself, that's terrible, but then you have to understand they're looking out for their interests, and Putin's looking out for his political future. I think Putin might have actually been brought up on war crimes. I think it was that far. So this is why we are where we are today. And believe you me, There are spies everywhere, and yes, there are people planted in different areas of government in different countries, and the CIA monitors things, and you don't even have to have people certain places because there's all kinds of stuff that just blows your mind when you find out how much technology is around. But at the end of the day, you have to understand this is a countermeasure, self-preservation. And this is what Russia is really trying to do. They're trying to show that their model of governance, through deception, lies, and so on, which is typical of almost any sort of system where humans are involved. This is what they're doing. They are countering and trying to weaken the United States of America through the tool of Donald Trump. He is their tool. I forgot the writer's name who wrote the book on how Russia is able to infiltrate and affect a country's politics. And pretty much they have certain measures that they are using right now from a certain playbook. One of them is spies, which is typical. The second one is having certain select people be positioned into places of governance. That is happening. Not to say that you have people from Russia who are in America and they live their lives and they're not tools of Russia at all, but so there's that. But I'm sure intelligence knows who they are and so on. And then you have and also there's infiltration through hacking now, because we are in they used to call it the cyber age, now they call it the internet, and we call it social media age. But there's all these programs that make they are building blocks for what we use in social media. There are programs that make this. When you go backdoor into those programs, that's where the hacking begins. But to just complete what I'm saying, the fourth measure that's used is what is called a tool. The tool is someone who identifies to some degree with some of the values that Russia would have. And this tool, unknowingly or knowingly, carries out to the T the agenda, the propaganda, the deception that Russia would want carried out. And Donald Trump has been a wonderful tool of Vladimir Putin. The fact that he never speaks bad of Vladimir Putin says that he admires him. And in fact, he has been used as a tool by Vladimir Putin. If you look at Germany, if you look at Russia today, they've tried to go back to their roots. Part of going back to your roots is purging, cleansing people who are not of your culture or of your roots, your background. As knowledge continues in the United States of America about its history, it's a savage and violent history, we must understand that where we are today as people come very far. It's not perfect, but the beautiful thing about it is what this country did was share with the world its idea of how governance can be. That governance can be shared. That governance, everyone can have a place and a part in governance, not just one person. Instead of unilateral governance, we saw multilateral governance. And that model is a beautiful one because with more players contributing to a particular outcome together, truly united, you can proceed towards a much more perfect union and a more perfect outcome. It was a mixture of the individual and the team. And everybody doesn't have to agree on everything. This is the beauty of the system. And I believe, in terms of governance, and still to this day, in terms of morality and ethics, to a high extent, it's better than just one singular individual who has many people working under him, directing the affairs. I'm not saying that there aren't strata as well, but in a republic, in a democratic republic, the president is a figurehead, but he is not the ultimate head. And what I mean by that is there are times when the president can be, as was seen, he can throw a veto, but it can be overridden by Congress. Ultimately, Congress and the Senate are the deciders of law and how things end. They are the ultimate deciders of anything. Collectively, they have more power than the president. The president, however, has quite a lot of power. And if he abuses it, it could become a very, very dangerous situation. And this president has abused his power. And that is why he needs to be removed from office. Can't wait 13 days down the road. He must be removed now. I gave this entire history lesson not to say that Russia isn't acting in their best interest or China isn't operating in its best interest. I'm not really on those things. But they must be held accountable, as Russia should hold America accountable, if at all America has done anything to Russia. But Russia must hold itself accountable, and also they must be held accountable by the American system for infiltrating the system and trying to harm the system. We understand it's warfare, but nonetheless, they must be held accountable. Now, if America does that to Russia, similarly, Russia should call it out, and they must be held accountable, which means if they have to, attack them back, so be it. So, and people get the ultimate view of what is going on, the chess game that's going on. This is what Donald Trump is doing. He is challenging every single aspect of the democracy. He has attacked the media first. And even to this day, a lot of us still don't trust the media that much. But to be honest with you, while we shouldn't gobble up everything we hear or see, we should do our homework. CNN particularly has been reasonably good media. Now, out of this, though, has come new media. We've heard this. I've seen it in boxing. You guys have seen it in boxing. And we've also seen it in other areas. New media, where individuals come up. Now, how credible is new media? It's not always the most credible because sometimes people get their information wrong. But we've been seeing more YouTube channels and more people popping up with their channels and speaking. Filling in the blanks, or sometimes speaking about where news media haven't gotten their information right or they missed information. And in this age where nobody watches the television anymore, that's almost outdated, that's important. So there have been good things and bad things, but the problem with people who isolate themselves and only listen to one part of information is that that's where the danger lies. And some people have isolated themselves and only listen to Donald Trump and Fox News and now AON and whatever other news organization. And they've found themselves brainwashed. Other people have been supporting Donald Trump based on certain things that have happened in the Supreme Court, for example, and in other areas, and other programs. And so they have been supportive of him because of certain legislation that was passed. But as we all realize right now, this is not a time to support those particular actions that Donald Trump has made and has done. And these actions directly attack, he's been weakening each institution and trying to destroy confidence in each institution of governance in the United States of America. And that's the problem with an outsider coming into Washington. An outsider doesn't understand Washington. And so he comes with his naivety to set the record straight, except the first thing you need to know is understand what Washington is about. You can't go into something, say you're going to change it, and you don't even know what it is. So that was his first mistake. Barack Obama came into Washington, D.C. He was a wise guy. He didn't go in there and attack people and try to mow down people. No. He observed the environment. He was paying attention. He was listening. He was watching. Because he wanted to have a course of progress that would work. And he had Joe Biden with him. Of course, he was under severe attack from the get-go because he was black. If Barack Obama was white, he probably would have had a much easier time there. But he's not seen as the perfect man from the perfect race. This is just a reality that happened back then. And we all know there's still a large amount of work to be done in America concerning systemic racism and classism. But even so, it has grown by leaps and bounds more than any other, I believe, because I grew up in democracy. Any other system of government. Of course, who am I to speak on that? Except I am happy to maintain the system that I grew up in. And maybe I'm just resistant to change, but I disagree with that severely. Seeing that several of the systems that have been implemented generally have more of a unilateral approach to things than they do a debative, multilateral way of proceeding with things. So I was perturbed tonight because I wanted to give this long spiel to say how dangerous and how perturbing it is that this experimental model of democracy would be abandoned. It will really affect the entire world. Unlike the socialism model and the Tsar model that was adopted in the United Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, for which I believe some of the model could work and you could still have the democracy going. And I believe that that's a good thing. But even with the semi-democratic model that they have right now in Russia, it's a sad day when there's still exploitation at the top and rigging of elections and so forth. Corruption. So the sedition that happened at the Capitol really interferes with wonderful things that could happen and the democracy grow forward. It is imperative that the democracy prevail rather than succumb to authoritarianism and therefore communism or a socialist state. The people who are carrying the flag and patriot hats and walking through Washington, D.C., but then their actions don't match their words, have corrupted and mocked the democracy. And unlike other politicians and players who may have, in part, served to try and get personal gain, these people defamed the institution of democracy. By doing so, and by their violent actions against democracy, these people showed and proved that they do not like democracy. Can that change? Of course it can. But the point behind it is that what measures are being taken for that reason. The bigger picture. And Nancy Pelosi summed it up very well. Some people say it's a bombshell. Some people say, oh, you're just playing too much into the thing. It's you're over exaggerating. No, this is not an over exaggeration. What is being sought to be introduced is not democracy. Some people call it Trumpism, nationalism. Some people even say Heil Trump. But at the end of the day, that is not democracy. So, Vladimir Putin's trying to hope for democracy to fall. Donald Trump has unilaterally removed himself from NATO, the United Nations. He bad talked the United Nations. You could see he took down, I tried to destroy all the institutions around it so that the United States of America could become isolationist so that he could run the country. He's systematically been trying to tarnish these different organizations and the allies of the United States of America, seeking to disconnect himself from them so that he could run autonomously the country. And he would be Putin's puppet, which he is. So this is what is happening. He's an instrument of Vladimir Putin. And that is why he needs to go. You can't keep him in the office of the president for much longer. He must be removed. And no matter who says what, the resolve must be to remove him, and as soon as possible, before the duration of time elapses. It's imperative on those people responsible around him, his cabinet, the Vice President Mike Pence, to ensure that he does not secure power for much longer. His road as president is terminated. He will only be a continual tool of Vladimir Putin, a threat to the democracy and institutions of democracy in America. The people who he has temporarily there running certain offices of government can still cause some trouble. But if they are under Mike Pence, I think much better decorum and control can be maintained. Hopefully. We will see. So that's what I have to say. Hopefully the transition of power continues onward without incident, like it did on Tuesday. Or was it Wednesday? On Wednesday, 6th of January, 2021. Have a good day, everybody.